Covering 1 square mile of New York City, Brooklyn's GreenWood Cemetery is a National Historic Landmark. More than 500,000 people are interred here, including the inventor Samuel Morse, composer Leonard Bernstein, artist Jean-Michel Basquiat, and rapper Pop Smoke. It's also the final resting place for an untold number of American war veterans. Now the cemetery is enlisting an army of volunteers to help tell the stories of those who served throughout our nation's history. GreenWood Cemetery's sprawling grounds, over 476 acres in Brooklyn, New York, has been called a green oasis, a place that serves as solace and peace for some, historical record for others, from its skyline views of Manhattan to its landmark chapel. Jeff Richman is the cemetery's historian.
It's a constant treasure hunt here. I don't think a week goes by where I don't find out about somebody fascinating who's interred here at the cemetery.
Richman isn't just talking about the rich and famous. In 2002, he made it his mission to identify the cemetery's military veterans, starting with the Civil War.
At the time, did you know how many Civil War soldiers, veterans were buried here?
I had no idea. We did have one volunteer, and he had been walking the grounds for 20 years, and he had a list of 250. And so I was young and foolish back then and thought that if he had 250, perhaps we would find another 250. And we have well past 5,000.
And it goes beyond just the name on the headstone, with each veteran tied to an online biography. After the Civil War identifications, the GreenWood Project turned to World War I.
How did you go about finding out more about these people?
Well, fortunately with the internet now, with a number of websites, there's just extraordinary information out there. It might be an obituary from 1903 saying, here's this person's story and he served in,
right.
And so those are kind of the magic words, served in the 51st New York Infantry, and then we can go from there.
The liberation of every town like this one, Strasbourg, capital of Alsace-Lorraine, requires staggering supplies of ammunition.
World War II is GreenWood Cemetery's current focus.
These are people who were there at Normandy when they landed, who fought their way across the Pacific. Also, we have come across a Rosie the Riveter who went to work. And so just this loving description from her daughter about my mother would dress up for the factory where she was working. And so she would wear this kind of industrial outfit. But the daughter was very careful to point out that after work, she would get back into her dress as a lady and come home to her family.
Families sharing stories and even documenting them.
My grandfather was in the Army and my grandmother was in the Navy as a nurse, and they met while in the Army and in the Navy serving, and that's, history is made.
Catherine Amore is one of about 20 volunteers currently compiling stories and pictures of the cemetery's World War II veterans, including her grandparents, Sebastian and Susan Amore. Her grandfather served as a corporal in the Army's 7th Armored Division, which saw heavy combat in Europe from 1944 until the end of the war. Her grandmother served in a women's naval reserve unit known as the Waves.
Waves learn combat tactics. Okay, Miss Third-Class Yeoman, we know when we're licked.
They met in Louisiana, where the 7th was training, and were married for 41 years after the war.
I'm learning more about how much history is out there of them, whether it's pictures, whether it's just stories that are documented in newspapers.
Yeah.
Because I know their lives, I knew what they did, but not necessarily those pieces of history.
Learning about another generation often teaches us something. Have you learned something from the greatest generation?
That's a good way to put it, right? I think what I've realized is that every generation has their struggles and every generation has their times that they look back on, and whether they regret it or not, saying, this is what I can learn from. I can learn from this. And if we don't document it, right, how do we learn from it?
Volunteer Barbara Buchholz has been working on the GreenWood Veterans Project from its inception. She is also the daughter of a World War II veteran.
As you've learned about some of the people buried here, it's also made you curious about your own father, who was a veteran.
My father, his uncles, they never talked about World War II, and we never asked about it, even when we were older. And then, unfortunately, when our parents passed, we find the pictures. My dad was in Normandy, he was in Belgium, he was in the European theater, Italy, and it's a new part of my father that I didn't know about. I'm learning about my father. And I didn't give much thought to World War II until recently.
For you, what stood out in learning these individual stories?
Just how important it is for us to remember them and tell their story, and to focus on just what makes life worth living.
Volunteer Jessica Waverka doesn't have a familial tie to any of GreenWood's veterans.
I want to know what motivates them. What motivates them to come from a small Midwestern town to New York? They joined World War II. What inspired them to enlist?
But you'd never know it when hearing her talk about those she's researched, like Private Frederick Budgell.
He was 17 years old when he was enlisted, a few months shy of 18. He went down there on a Thursday. On a Tuesday, he was sworn in, went off to World War II, came back. He had 9 children. He was an iron worker, proud iron worker for 45 years.
We were with her when she visited Private Budgell's gravesite for the first time.
What does it mean to you to see the headstone? This is no longer a stranger. This is someone, I have to think, you feel like you know.
It makes me proud to be part of his story and to part of telling his story.
It's a pride GreenWood's other volunteers and Jeff Richmond share by sharing the stories of those who sacrificed to serve our country.
Why, for you, is this so important?
Ultimately, a cemetery is about remembrance. And so these monuments and these memorials that are out there remember the people, but there are stories behind each of these lives. And so we're trying to share those stories and collect those stories, and it's just been a wonderful opportunity.
And it's stories that help us learn history, learn from history. There was one volunteer, Barbara, who we spoke with, and she knew her dad was in World War II, but she'd never asked any questions. And unfortunately, he's gone, but now she's started looking into that and wondering about it.
So nice to see the mom take her kids there so they can learn about history and learn about why people made that choice to serve.
Yeah, I think about it. It just makes your relatives, those people who came before us, feel real. Like they were here, they made contributions, and they're in many ways like us.
Yeah.
We don't think of them that way, though.
But that is exactly it. It's that remembrance. And they are still looking for more veterans that are at GreenWood Cemetery. If you have information on a World War II veteran who is buried at GreenWood, you can fill out an information form online at green-wood.com. And yes, they do expect maybe to turn this into projects for also like the Korean War and other wars that came past.